Amazingly, the whole history of Israel in the Old Testament is a complete prefigurement for the entire history of the Catholic Church, right up to our present day, in great detail and in chronological order. For a short 9-minute summary video that demonstrates this amazing act of God, watch this video. For a deeper look into these parallels, see our YouTube channel, Maccabean Uprising, and also visit our webpage at www.maccabeanuprising.com. Before we examine the prophecy of the 70 weeks of years in the 9th chapter of the book of Daniel, I would like to offer an idea. The Old Testament contains the entire history of the Israelites. The Israelites were the Old Testament people of God. Their entire history from start to finish is completely contained in the Old Testament. Similarly, the New Testament is the entire history of the new people of God, the Catholic Church. We are still in the New Testament, even though our history is not recorded entirely in the Bible. If the Old prefigures the New, then it makes sense that the entire history of the Catholic Church would be prefigured by the Old Testament. Would this prefigurement continue all the way to the end of church history?
Elevated to the papacy, Angelo Giuseppe Cardinal Roncalli. He will reign as Pope John the 23rd.
Because the whole history of the Catholic Church is prefigured by the Old Testament in chronological order, then many implications are brought forward to consider. Among these is the new light shed on the Old Testament prophecies in the book of Daniel. Many of the prophecies of the book of Daniel pertain to empires that will rule over God's people before the first coming of Christ. The footnotes and chapter headings in the Douay-Rheims Bible, the book of Daniel, tells us who these empires are and how they are represented in the prophecies of the book of Daniel. The primary empires mentioned are the Babylonian Empire, the Persian Empire, the Greek Empire, started by Alexander the Great and divided after his death, and finally the Roman Empire. These empires did certain and specific things to God's Old Testament people and are represented by various beasts and other imagery in the book of Daniel. Therefore, because there are direct parallels between these pagan empires in the Old Testament and their New Testament counterparts, then we can see that the prophecies of the Old Testament that have fulfillments before the first coming of Christ also appear to have corresponding fulfillments in the Church's history before the second coming of Christ. Here are those empires from the Old Testament and their New Testament counterparts. See our YouTube channel and our website for a more detailed explanation of the parallels. The Babylonian Empire took away the land of the Jews and brought them into captivity. King Nebuchadnezzar was king of the Babylonians, and he is called, in the book of Daniel, the King of Kings. The Babylonians breached the walls of Jerusalem and conquered the city. King Nebuchadnezzar strips Jerusalem and the temple of all its valuables. The Kingdom of Italy completely confiscated the Papal States in 1870, and the popes afterwards were called prisoners in the Vatican. King Emmanuel II is head of the Kingdom of Italy, and he is called the Father of the Fatherland. the Italians breached the Roman Aurelian walls at Porta Pia and conquer Rome and the Vatican. King Victor Emmanuel II confiscates and sells church property. The Jews were in exile without their land for 70 years, until the Persians conquered the Babylonians. The Persian king, King Cyrus the Great, decreed that the Jews could go back to Jerusalem. King Cyrus paid for the reconstruction of Jerusalem, and he wanted to remake its past glory. However, the Jews owed the Persians their allegiance. Jerusalem was kept by the Jews as a city-state. Mussolini and his fascist government supplanted the Kingdom of Italy. He signed the Lateran Treaty with the Church, which gave the Church back a small portion of their land. This small portion was called Vatican City, which is a city-state. Mussolini was obsessed with rebuilding Rome, and he wanted to remake its past glory. The Lateran Treaty obliged Italian bishops to swear an oath of allegiance to the Italian state before obtaining control of their diocese. The Persians were eventually defeated by Alexander the Great, who conquered almost the whole ancient world. Alexander ruled for 12 years, and he died suddenly. Greek culture spread all over the ancient world in a process called Hellenization. Traditional cultures everywhere were adopting Greek language, customs, and beliefs. Upon his death, Alexander's empire was broken up into 4 kingdoms. 2 of these kingdoms, the Seleucid and the Ptolemaic kingdoms, fought a long series of wars, with the Jewish people caught in the middle. The Seleucid kingdom gained control of Jerusalem, and the Greek-Syrian king Antiochus IV Epiphanes took over the Jewish temple and set up a second altar. The fascists were defeated by the Allied forces, led by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was president for 12 years, and he died suddenly after World War II. After World War II, America paid for the rebuilding of Europe, and American culture began to spread all over the world. English spread as the universal second language all over the world. This is known as Americanization. Upon the death of Franklin Roosevelt, Germany was split in 4 occupation zones. The Americans and the Soviet Union each occupied one of those 4 parts. After World War II, the Americans and Soviets started a long standoff known as the Cold War, with Italy caught in the middle, as both sides fought to gain control over Italian politics. Did the Communists succeed in gaining control of the Vatican in the 1960s with the Second Vatican Council? A second altar was erected in every church for the new Novus Ordo rite. And finally, the Roman Empire grew in power and eventually ended the long standoff between the Seleucid and the Ptolemaic Greek kingdoms, as both were conquered by the Romans. The Romans now ruled over Jerusalem and Judea. The Soviet Union fell in 1991, and the European Union was formed in 1993. The EU united the Western Americanized European countries with the Eastern Soviet European countries. Italy, like all European countries, was now dominated by European politics and was under the jurisdiction of the charters, commissions, and ruling bodies of the European Union. The following verses from the 9th chapter of the book of Daniel are taken from the Douay-Rheims Bible. In the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, of the seed of the Medes, who reigned over the kingdom of the Chaldeans. The first year of his reign, I, Daniel, understood by books the number of the years, concerning which the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah the prophet, that 70 years should be accomplished of the desolation of Jerusalem. And I set my face to the Lord my God, to pray and make supplication with fasting, sackcloth, and ashes. And I prayed to the Lord my God, and I made my confession, and said, I beseech thee, O Lord God, great and terrible, who keepest the covenant, and mercy to them that love thee, and keep thy commandments. We have sinned, we have committed iniquity, we have done wickedly, and have revolted, and we have gone aside from thy commandments and thy judgments. We have not hearkened to thy servants the prophets, that have spoken in thy name to our kings and to our princes, to our fathers, to all the people of the land. To thee, O Lord, justice, but to us confusion of face, as at this day to the men of Judah, and to the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and to all Israel, to them that are near, and to them that are far off in all the countries whither thou hast driven them, for their iniquities by which they have sinned against thee. O Lord, to us belongeth confusion of face, to our princes and to our fathers that have sinned. But to thee, the Lord our God, mercy and forgiveness, for we have departed from thee. And we have not hearkened to the voice of the Lord our God, to walk in his law, which he set before us by his servants the prophets. And all Israel have transgressed thy law, and have turned away from hearing thy voice. And the malediction and the curse, which is written in the book of Moses the servant of God, is fallen upon us, because we have sinned against him. And he hath confirmed his words, which he spoke against us, and against our princes that judged us, that he would bring it in upon us a great evil, such as never was under all of the heaven, according to that which hath been done in Jerusalem. And it is written in the law of Moses, all this evil has come upon us, and we entreated not thy face, O Lord our God, that we might turn from our iniquities, and think of thy truth. And the Lord hath watched upon the evil, and hath brought it upon us. The Lord our God is just in all his works, which he hath done, for we have not hearkened to his voice. And now, O Lord God, who hast brought forth thy people out of the land of Egypt with a strong hand, and hath made thee a name as at this day, we have sinned, and we have committed iniquity. O Lord, against all thy justice, let thy wrath and thy indignation be turned away. I beseech thee, from thy city Jerusalem, and from thy holy mountain. For by reason of our sins, and the iniquity of our fathers, Jerusalem and thy people are a reproach to all that are around about us. Now, therefore, O our God, hear the supplication of thy servant and his prayers, and show thy face upon thy sanctuary, which is desolate, for thy own sake. Incline, O my God, thy ear, and hear. Open thy eyes, and see our desolation, and the city upon which thy name is called. For it is not for our justifications that we present our prayers before thy face, but for the multitude of thy tender mercies. O Lord, hear, O Lord, be appeased, hearken and do. Delay not for thy own sake. O my God, because thy name is invocated upon the city and upon thy people. Now while I was yet speaking and praying and confessing my sins and the sins of my people of Israel, and presenting my supplications in the sight of my God, for the holy mountain of my God, as I was yet speaking in prayer, behold, the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in a vision at the beginning, flying swiftly, touched me at the time of the evening sacrifice. The man Gabriel, the angel Gabriel in the shape of a man. And he instructed me and spoke to me and said, O Daniel, I am now come forth to teach thee, and that thou mightest understand. From the beginning of thy prayers the word came forth, and I am come to show it to thee, because thou art a man of desires. Therefore do thou mark the word and understand the vision. Man of desires, that is ardently praying for the Jews then in captivity. 70 weeks are shortened upon thy people and upon thy holy city, that transgression may be finished, and sin may have an end. Iniquity may be abolished, and everlasting justice may be brought, and vision and prophecy may be fulfilled, and the saint of saints may be anointed. 70 weeks of years, or 70 times 7, that is 490 years, are shortened, that is fixed and determined, so that the time shall be no longer. Know thou therefore, and take notice, that from the going forth of the word to build up Jerusalem again, unto Christ the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks, and 62 weeks. And the street shall be built again, and the walls and straightness of times. From the going forth of the word, that is, from the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when by his commandment Nehemiah built the walls of Jerusalem, from which time, according to the best chronology, there were just 69 weeks of years, that is, 483 years, to the baptism of Christ, when he first began to preach and execute this office of Messiah. In straightness of times, which may allude both to the difficulties and opposition they met with in building, and to the shortness of the time in which they finished the wall. And after 62 weeks, Christ shall be slain, and the people that shall deny him shall not be his. And a people with their leader shall come, and shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be a waste, and after the end of the war, the appointed desolation. A people with their leader, the Romans under Titus. And he shall confirm the covenant with many. In 1 week, and in the half of the week, the victim and the sacrifice shall fall. And there shall be in the temple the abomination of desolation. And the desolation shall continue even to the consummation and to the end. In the half week, or in the middle of the week, because Christ preached 3 years and a half, and then by his sacrifice upon the cross, abolished all the sacrifices of the law. The abomination of desolation. Some understand this of the profanation of the temple by the crimes of the Jews, and by the bloody faction of the Zealots. Others of the bringing in thither the ensigns and standard of the pagan Romans. Others, in fine, distinguish 3 different types of desolation: that under Antiochus, that when a temple was destroyed by the Romans, and the last near the end of the world under Antichrist, to all which, as they suppose, this prophecy may have a relation. First of all, let me say that this prophecy has proven very difficult for biblical scholars throughout history. I don't claim to fully understand the discussions about the original Greek or Hebrew words in this prophecy. Secondly, like so many prophecies, it most likely has multiple fulfillments, so no one interpretation of this prophecy is the only correct one. I just read the interpretation of this prophecy for the Douay-Rheims Bible, and those footnotes that were just read also testify to there being multiple fulfillments of this prophecy. Our departure point for seeing a fulfillment of this prophecy in the history of the Catholic Church is taken from the understanding of the parallels between the Book of the Maccabees and Vatican II Novus Ordo. It is in that parallel that we can most plainly see how the Abomination of Desolation, spoken of in the books of the Maccabees, is directly comparable to the creation and implementation of the Novus Ordo rite. Let's go over these parallels again, because they are at the heart of this fulfillment of the 70 weeks of years prophecy in church history. Antiochus IV Epiphanes arrogantly marches into the temple and he takes down all the ornaments. Catholic ornaments are taken down in Catholic churches worldwide after Vatican II. Antiochus IV Epiphanes erects a second altar over and against the altar of God in the temple. A second altar is erected in front of the traditional altar in every Catholic church worldwide. Antiochus places the Abomination of Desolation on the second altar on the 15th of Kislev. Paul VI officially promulgates the Novus Ordo on April 3, 1969. However, bishops are still permitted to allow the Tridentine Mass in their diocese until November 28, 1971. Therefore, starting on November 28, 1971, the Novus Ordo appeared on the second altar in every Catholic church worldwide. If you convert November 28, 1971, to a date on the Jewish calendar, it is the 10th day of Kislev. This is the Sunday closest to the 15th of Kislev without going past the Jewish calendar date. Antiochus outlawed the traditional Jewish sacrifice, and he mandated his new sacrifice. The Tridentine Mass was effectively outlawed, and the Novus Ordo was universally mandated. One old priest, Mattathias, refused to perform the new sacrifice of King Antiochus. He fled to the hills to preserve the traditional Jewish law and to fight back. One old bishop, Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, refused to say the Novus Ordo. He fled to the Alps and started the SSPX to preserve the traditional Catholic faith and religion and to fight back. Taken together, these parallels can hardly be seen as a coincidence. Taken together and in the context that the entire history of the Church is prefigured by the entire history of Israel in the Old Testament, not just Vatican II, then these parallels seem to take on an almost pedagogical or educational purpose. From these parallels, we can see that the Novus Ordo is clearly prefigured by the Abomination of Desolation. Thus, we can insert the date of November 28, 1971, into the prophecy at the midweek point. Let's read that portion of the prophecy again. And he shall confirm the covenant with many in 1 week, and in the half of the week the victim and the sacrifice shall fall, and there shall be in the temple the abomination of desolation, and the desolation shall continue even to the consummation and to the end. The abomination of desolation has to appear midweek, which means there is an equal amount of time before and after, and they probably should be both important dates of some kind, so as to clearly mark the beginning and ending of the final week. So going forth in both directions from 1971, we eventually come to the two dates of February 11th, 1929, and February 11th, 2013. Each of these two dates are 42 years from 1971. February 11th, 1929 is the date of the signing of the Lateran Treaty. This treaty did many things. It gave Vatican City to the Church. It gave a lot of money to the Church. It forbade the Church to enter into international politics. But it also confirmed the Catholic faith and religion in Italy by making Catholicism the state religion of Italy. In doing so, it confirmed the covenant with many. The date of February 11th, 2013 is the day on which Benedict XVI stepped down, and the Vatican was struck with lightning twice in what was seen by the world as some kind of a sign. We will come back to this event in a later video. Thus it seems very likely that we have a fulfillment of the final week. From this point, it is now possible to work backwards and see if the rest of the prophecy is fulfilled. There are still the 69 weeks that precede this final 70th week. Going back 69 weeks of years from the Lateran Treaty in 1929, we arrive at the year 1446. This is accomplished by multiplying 69 and 7, which equals 483. 1929 minus 483 equals 1446. The year 1446 was the year before Pope Nicholas V was elected to the chair of St. Peter. Pope Nicholas V made it his immediate priority to decree the rebuilding of Rome, which had been left in disrepair since the time of the Avignon papacy in the early 1300s, some 150 years prior. Pope Nicholas set out to make Rome a city of grandeur again, and even announced plans for the building of a new basilica of St. Peter's. He started collecting building materials for his planned projects. From Wikipedia, his first care was practical, to reinforce the city's fortifications, cleaning and even paving some main streets. But the works on which Nicholas especially set his heart were the rebuilding of the Vatican, the Borgo district, and St. Peter's Basilica, where the reborn glories of the papacy were to be focused. He got as far as pulling down part of the ancient basilica, made some alterations to the Lateran palace, and laid up 2,522 cartloads of marble from the dilapidated Colosseum for use in the later constructions. Thus, we can reread the words of the prophecy again, but this time substitute the word Rome for Jerusalem. In the Old Testament fulfillment, Jerusalem was the holy city of God's people. In the New Testament history of the Church, Rome is the holy city of God's people. Thus we can say that going forth from the decree to rebuild Rome. Now that we have the beginning and the end dates of this prophecy determined, and have pinpointed the decree to rebuild Rome, and the midweek abomination of desolation, we can move on to identifying the rest of the prophecy. Know thou therefore and take notice, that from the going forth of the word to build up Jerusalem again, unto Christ the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks, and the street shall be built again, and the walls in straightness of times. Now there are multiple ways to understand the chronology and sequence of this passage. One way to understand it is that after 7 weeks and 62 weeks, the street shall be built again, and the walls in straightness of times. Thus, if we go forth from 1446, a period of 7 weeks, and then 62 weeks, we arrive again at 1929. 1929 was not only the year in which Mussolini signed the Lateran Treaty with the Church, But it was also the time in which Mussolini was fully into his obsession to rebuild Rome. He rebuilt the streets, renovated old buildings, and wanted to make Rome into the glorious capital of his new fascist empire. For the church, Mussolini's reign constituted the straightness of times. Mussolini put incredible pressure on the church to submit to his authority. Indeed, these were difficult times for the Holy Father, with the rise of fascism across Europe. So now we can move on to verse 26 again. And after 62 weeks, Christ shall be slain, and the people that shall deny him shall not be his. And a people with their leader that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be waste, and after the end of the war, the appointed desolation. Now at this point, we need to expound on a tangential line of thought concerning the actual date that Christ died on the cross. One of the leading dates that is conjectured is April 3rd, 33 AD. It is possible to narrow down such a date because there are many clues in the gospel for us to follow. For instance, we know Christ died on both a Friday and on a Passover. Using clues in the gospel, we can narrow the date range down between 29 AD and 36 AD, because we know when Pontius Pilate ruled over Judea and when Tiberius Caesar started his rule. Between those dates, there are only 2 Passover dates that occur on a Friday. Those dates are Friday, April 7th, 30 AD, and Friday, April 3rd, 33 AD. By using one more clue in the Gospel concerning the length of our Lord's public ministry and the reign of Tiberius Caesar, and see the link provided in the description section of this video, we can determine that he died on April 3rd, 33 AD. Why this information is relevant is that this date is reproduced in the promulgation of Novus Ordo. Paul VI signed the Novus Ordo on Friday, April 3rd, 1969. If you look on a Jewish calendar, you will see that this date happens to be also a Passover day. Thus, because Christ is truly present in the Holy Eucharist, it would seem that the promulgation of Novus Ordo on Friday, April 3rd, 33 AD, on the feast of the Jewish Passover, seems to constitute the crucifixion of the Tridentine Mass, and subsequently of Christ, since he is truly present in the Holy Eucharist. Another astonishing coincidence is the presence of a lunar eclipse on both the date of April 3rd, 33 AD, and April 3rd, 1969. The lunar eclipse was visible in Jerusalem in 33 AD, but the lunar eclipse in 1969 was visible from Rome. Thus, putting all these similarities together, it would seem that in 1969, Christ was slain in the Mass. So now let's reread chapter 26. And after 62 weeks, Christ shall be slain, and the people that shall deny him shall not be his. And a people with their leader that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be waste, and after the end of the war, the appointed desolation. After the end of the 62nd week, that is, in the last and final week, which goes from the year 1929 to 2013, Christ is slain. The people that deny him shall not be his. The modernists are not his. Thus, let's look at the whole prophecy of the 70 weeks of years from start to finish one more time. Know thou therefore, and take notice, that from the going forth of the word to build up Jerusalem again, unto Christ the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks, and the street shall be built again, and the walls and straightness of times. And after 62 weeks, Christ shall be slain, and the people that shall deny him shall not be his. And a people with their leader that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be waste, and after the end of the war, the appointed desolation. And he shall confirm the covenant with many in 1 week, and in the half of the week the victim and the sacrifice shall fall, and there shall be in the temple the abomination of desolation, and the desolation shall continue even to the consummation and to the end. We will show in a later video how the fulfillment of this prophecy points to Antichrist. We would just like to point out that this interpretation of the prophecy of the 70 weeks of years is unique among all the other interpretations because it is uniquely Catholic. It exposes the Novus Ordo and points to the Tridentine Mass and the traditional Catholic faith. Since the Bible is really a Catholic book, it would make sense that the fulfillment of Daniel's end times prophecies directly relate to the traditional Catholic faith of the ages. Please stay tuned, for there is much more to come.